Hi, my name is Keith Cooper, and in this short video I'm going to have a look at printing cards, greeting cards, all sorts of cards on the Canon PRO-300. Now, quite a lot of what I'll cover here is fairly general for other printers as well, but obviously I'm just using this one as an example. The particular paper or card, thin card that I'm trying, is a matte 300 gram. It's available from, this one's from a local supplier, Pinnacle branded, so it's Paper Spectrum here in Leicester in the UK. Lots of people produce cards like this, but this is a local supplier that I know quite well. And this is a bright white, smooth surface card. It's a matte finish, it's 300 grams, which gives it quite a nice thickness, and it's double-sided. Now, that means you can print double-sided. Of course, it's not quite as easy as that because this printer doesn't have a feed tray with a duplexer, but I'm going to say that if you've got a printer with a duplexer, it's highly unlikely to print card of this quality. Now, I was able to get a couple of A3 sheets of this card, and it's a very nice card, thin card, thick paper, depends what you want to call it. This is where I made a colour profile for it. Colour profile's available if anyone wants it for non-commercial use. If you want to use it commercially, then give us a shout, but it's available for free for non-commercial use. Why did I make two profiling targets here? Well, there's an interesting question when it comes to a printer like this as to which paper feed to use. Now, I've got another paper that I'm going to be looking at sometime where I was unable to reliably use the front feed and had to use the rear feed. Now, I know a lot of people don't like using the rear feed. I use the front feed on the top feed here, I should say, for almost all my paper testing for stuff, and it works very well for most art papers I've tried. Certainly feeds this quite well. Give an idea of the thickness of it. It's quite a thickish card. It's not really thick, it's not a thick heavyweight card, but it's quite nice for when it's folded. Now, these are A6. Now, A6 is a bit of an odd size. I'll come to that in a bit, but the ones I'm looking at here for printing initially are these ones here. These are 148mm square. It's 148 by 296. Once again, not a standard size. This paper with cards available in AA5 and other papers that can print borderless if you really want. I would say, however, that if you're going to be printing many cards, be very careful with printers like this, desktop printers, when printing borderless. The big problem with borderless is that it's borderless because ink goes right up to the edge. That means some of the ink goes over the edge. That's picked up by various pads in the printer. It creates ink droplets that spread around in the air in the printer. It collects, add to that paper dust if you're using thick papers, particularly rag papers, less so one like this, but you can just end up with gunk in the printer and your printer can get dirty. If you start getting smears on things, then it's an indication that there's building up in the printer, perhaps on the print head or something like that, and it needs cleaning. Now, there are cleaning options for this, but you do need to consider that if you're going to do printing borderless. And this is on any inkjet printer. That ink that sprays over the edge has to go somewhere. And these printers are made for borderless printing, but I'm going to say they're made for occasional borderless printing, not continuous. And that goes for Epson printers as well that I've looked at. They have the same issue. The ink goes over the edge, has to go somewhere. But anyway, here it is. Here's a sheet of 148 by, well, it's 148 square, two sheets, so it's 148 by 296. I'm going to print a test image that I've got. These test images are available. So this is really just to check what the print quality is like on this one here. Now, I'm printing from Photoshop, you can print from other things. You can use the Canon print software for this if you like. Affinity Photo, loads of other software packages, but make sure you've got proper color management. There's no point in having profiles and stuff if they're not being used. Now, here's the image. I'm just going to print this from Photoshop. Here's the print dialog. Now, I'm not going to go into all the details of these. The settings are fairly obvious, but One of the problems that I said you can't print borderless, that means you need a margin. You will need to define a custom paper size for some of these sizes. Now, nothing wrong with custom paper sizes, they work, but they have to have margins. One of the issues is that if you go on this particular printer here, and I go to the print settings here, I've defined a size of, there's a setting I've set here. I'm using the heavyweight, the fine art paper setting for this paper. If I used the slot at the back, I'd have to use a different setting for that. I can use the premium matte A setting. Have a look at the main review of this printer I've done where I look more at printer settings, but suffice to say I can use the fine art paper, heavy fine art paper setting here for printing on this printer with this particular media. Now I've got a setting here, HFAP 148 by 2, and I've set that, and it's set a custom paper size of 148 by 296 millimeters, and that's the size that I'm going to print on here. Now, we've got that there. Here it is. There is a border on this. I'm not going to scale the test print at all. I'm going to print it as is, which means there'll be some overlap. Now, I've loaded the paper into here, and I've set the paper size as other. The paper size will be overridden by the computer here, so there's no need to set custom paper sizes on here. You can set custom paper sizes, but there's no need to do it on here. Reminds me that the image is larger, so there will be some clipping. Well, yes, I know that, and we'll see what happens. And now it should print. Tells me on the screen here, gives the name of the file, the test card, so I know it's got the correct image. It's going to come through fairly quickly. You see, it loads smoothly. Now, when you're checking cards, try a sample. It's what this test image is for. Try a sample and see how well it feeds. I suspect this is best done one sheet at a time. You might be able to get a couple of sheets or so of this particular media, but it really is very much dependent on the printer. It's the printer you've got. Different printers, some of them handle paper ever slightly better than others. It also depends on the settings. This media, it's great with it, works fine. I have come across media where the thickness of the card, the stiffness of the card means they don't feed particularly well by this slot. You need to help them in. Now that could mark the edges of the paper. So in that case, I would use the rear feed slot. Now rear feed slot is loading up one at a time. That's where you go. That can take a while. If you're thinking of printing cards, I'm printing this at the highest quality level, purely because it makes a little bit of a difference and I just want to see what it comes out. This is for a test. I might run at the standard quality level if I was printing several of these cards, because they are disc cards. People aren't going to notice too much the fine differences in fine detail. But remember that if you're looking at doing prints, lots of prints, allow for your time loading up the printer, unloading it afterwards. So this will take a little bit because it's at the highest quality level. Well, here comes the print. No marks on the corners, no nothing. With card like this, be very careful about curl in the card, because if the corners pick up, your head's likely to hit it and it will make a smudge. Maybe not a problem perhaps if you're going to frame a picture, but if you're sending a card like this, you don't want inky smudges along the edge of the card. The actual image here is a standard test image that I've got, and I've also added to it some text and some fine detail. There's some fine text on it as well. So you can use that for if you're producing double-sided cards and your media is perhaps not listed as a double-sided card. You might want to experiment whether there are any print settings that allow for text to print on that non-coated side. Just remember that the problem is if you want to print a picture or anything like that, you can with most cards only print it on one side with the detail. You may be able to print some text, but not always. This is about looking at the image quality that I'm getting from here, and hence this particular test image. Now this is a standard test image. I've got this available at larger sizes for download. I use it as part of my printer testing all the time. I know it well, I know what it should look like, and I can tell pretty quickly when I look at an image whether there are any issues with it. Now, it's a matte paper, which means that the blacks in photos are not going to be as dark as you get with a photo type paper, but that is, and I'll show this when I show the other size, depends on the kind of image you're using. So you will need to experiment. Now fortunately this matte card is relatively inexpensive. Get some postcards perhaps and test some of your images on it rather than the full size, because this comes with envelopes. So every test here I'm getting myself a spare envelope which I didn't need. Right, there's the image. Now this is pre-creased, this paper, so there's a fold down the middle for when it's folded. There's the image. I can look at this, now I know this image quite well, and immediately it looks fine. Well, that's good. You've seen the sheets I've used for making profiles. Those are the same sort of profiles I do for my fine art prints, so I've got no concerns about the quality of the profiles. It looks good. There's no banding, there are no problems whatsoever. It's printed over the edge perfectly fine. There's really good detail, crisp text. Now, I said it was double-sided. There's one I printed earlier. What's the difference between these two? Because there is a difference. If you look at this one here, this is the one I printed earlier, this is using the perceptual rendering intent. And the one on this side is using the relative colorimetric rendering intent. It's a setting, a driver setting you may come across. There is no hard and fast guide as to, for your images, whether you should use relative colorimetric or perceptual. It is a matter of what looks best. Now, in this instance, when I look at that picture and look at that, there's not actually that much difference. I would say, however, for this image, I would normally print it at relative colorimetric. The perceptual one can handle colours differently. Now, if I get my hand lens out and I check some of the details on this, I will be able to spot the differences. But there we go. We've got a double-sided card printed on both sides. And there's a crease on it. And it folds. Now, one little thing on this, when you print double-sided, when I print this, this comes through this way. How do you put the sheet back in? You might think, well, I'll just turn it that way and send it that way. In that case, you'll get the print upside down inside it. What you need to do is take it out and just put, it comes out that way, put it in the same way. So there's no rotation along that axis. So comes out like that. Here's a print, it's print side, and there's for the next print, and it will come out. Because if you're not careful, if you get it wrong, you will get a print like that, and then when you look on the inside, you'll get an upside down version. You don't want that, so make sure you don't flip the paper that way when you do it. It's something you'll have to plan. I've got templates that I use for cards and available, produced them for some other reviews I've done. And the templates are there, they're there for download. They're Photoshop templates, they've just got guides on them. They allow, if you want to position a picture that just slightly overlaps the crease. Because what you ideally want when you're making a card like this is for the image to overlap the crease by 0.5 millimeter or so. And that means when the card is folded, there's no annoying white edge here. Now, remember you've got a border. That's up to you to how you handle that, that's your design. Now, there are some card sizes supported at Borderless, but if you want to use a size like this, you will need to allow for a border. When you set the border in the custom page size, I would note that the defaults on the Canon printer are not symmetrical. So set the page, well, I've set them at 5 millimeters because that's the largest of the borders that's available. The others are 3 millimeter and 3.4 millimeters. I do not want odd size borders around my print, so I've set a default of 5mm. That's set in the custom size settings here in Photoshop. So there we go, we've got that one there. So there's a card printed with that. Let's have a look at the postcards. Right, I've loaded one of the postcard sizes there. It's still set as page size others because A6 is not supported. So I've had to use a custom size. 6x4 is supported, the 7x5 is supported. It's just a matter of which sizes fit. It covers borders and things, as I've mentioned anyway. But anyway, we've got that loaded up there. It's set for other size, heavy art paper. Same setting as before, single sheet loaded up there. And I'm going to print an image here. Now I'm printing this image using the A6 setting, which is a custom setting I've made for this. So we've got that set for A6. Once again, we have a problem with borders. You can scale your image to fit, or I've just put it in this space, and you can see the borders are quite large. So it's 5mm border once again. If you were to set the default borders, it's 5mm on one edge, 3.4 on the other, and then 3 on either side. So it's a bit awkward size. So you need to play around with this. What I would say is that if you are playing around with designs and layouts, get a decent roller guillotine, small one, you don't need a big one for this. Make sizes out of just ordinary copier paper of the size you want. Test it on the plain paper setting. It saves wasting card and it's much quicker to test things. And you can test your margins, you can test your layouts. The pictures won't look terribly good on a plain copier type paper, but it saves an awful lot of paper. So anyway, there we are. We've got that set. I'm printing this at relative colorimetric, which I know works well with this image here. It's a bright image and we're doing it on a matte paper. Perhaps not always the sort of image I'd pick for that, but we'll see how it comes out. Now, one thing I would notice is that this image printed at that size comes out at about 1400 pixels per inch. From testing that I've done, and I've got some a video and some articles looking at resolution, I do not need to scale it down. I can happily send 1400 pixels per inch to the printer driver. It will scale, it will produce whatever it needs. You won't cause any problems. So there's no need to scale an image specifically down to fit something like this. There are no magic numbers when it comes to printer resolutions. I know some people still believe there are, but I've tested it on several printers and I can see no evidence that there is anything special about resolutions. So we're sending this one as is. I'm just sending it at the size that's needed to come out on this particular printer. Right, well, here's the card. I specified 5mm margins. You may be able to see, and I'm not sure on this, that the margins are slightly bigger at the top and the bottom. That's because I scaled this image and it's scaled to fit widthwise. It's not quite tall enough. So when you're sticking images into the template or into your document to print it, make sure when you scale them and you're allowing for margins that you allow for the change of shape, the aspect ratio of the picture. So anyway, there's our print. Colours are nice and bright, that's good. So it's come out that way. I'm going to put this, I should ideally leave this to dry a little bit lower, but we'll risk it and see. I'm just going to give it a bit of a dry like that. Check for the curve because the dampness will make it curve. Now I put this back in. It's set, paper size still set, and I'm going to print a different image. This one, much higher key image. I'm using the profile I've made for this paper. That's fair enough for that. Set for A6. Now this particular one I print using perceptual rendering. I happen to know the image comes out slightly better with that. Now I've quite deliberately done this printing fairly quickly because I want to check something about ink transfer, and I suspect that because I've put this in fairly quickly, that there are going to be marks. Now, there are rollers inside here and you will need to clean them. If you're going to print double-sided, ink, even if you leave your prints to dry quite a while, ink will come off on the rollers. So you really want to be careful about keeping the print rollers clean. Now, various ways in it. You can put cleaning sheets through. You can put sheets of plain copier paper through. So just run a load of sheets of plain copier paper through. But watch out for marks, because if there's one thing spoils things like cards, as I've said, marks on the corners, marks elsewhere. And my suspicion is that because I've run these prints through quite quickly and they've not had long enough to dry, is that we're going to see marks. What would I do if I was producing lots of cards? I would print one side of the card. I would leave them ideally for a good few hours in the air to dry properly, and then run them through to print the second side. Because I don't want marks. Double-sided printing is always problematic. Now, it's nice, this is a double-sided media, great, we can use it, but I suspect it's going to show that there are some slight marks, and these will come from ink being picked up by some of the feed rollers. So if you absolutely must print double-sided, be very careful about it. Now, here we go. There's Canon Beach in Dorset. Yeah, they look rather nice. I look very carefully. I can see a very faint smudge. Or it's not a smudge, it's a slight darkening, and it looks like where one of the rollers has made a mark on the paper. Now, in terms of quality, it's up to you to work out whether it matches what you want, but that's double-sided. Don't do what I've done, I'm going to say, and print straight off, because you're asking for problems. It does take a while to dry these. If I was being really careful about it, I'd print one lot of one sides one day, leave them overnight, and print the other sides the next day, because ink will rub off and will come onto the other side. But that looks rather nice. So there we go. There is a basic card. I printed on the inside as well. And there is a double-sided postcard. Now, I'm going to do a few more tests, media I've got for this. So if you've got any questions, please do ask. Please do subscribe to the channel as well if you find it helpful. Gives me ideas about other stuff to do, and I hope it's of use. And as I say, what I've done here applies to a lot of other printers as well. So just because it's a 300 here doesn't mean this is only the 300. Other stuff, paper sizes will vary, margins will vary, but you'll be able to do the printing all the same. So thanks very much. Bye.